Welcome to the fifth lecture of Ethical Issues for Modern Computer Professionals. Coming back to the privacy issues, after anonymity, let us discuss the consequences and uh, remedies of disclosure of certain personal informations, um, which are assumed to be critical or sensitive to some extent, like religion, race, ethnicity, political belief, sexual orientation, gender, certain health issues, including some psychological problem or some critical illness like HIV, which are very prone to some kind of discrimination uh, based on the inherent bias that has been developed in our society or some societal taboo. For example, uh, someone's religious belief is often uh, act as an uh, act as a weapon for uh, discrimination. Like it is very common that in some area or locality or state or some country belonging to a certain religion, especially of minority community, may lead to some kind of discrimination due to some inherent bias in the society. And this is becoming very much prevalent in current situation of India. Some kind of phobia nurtured in our society against some typical community is exaggerating this type of discrimination to a great extent. So, irrespective of someone's um, individual or professional contribution, positive contribution, just due to their religious background, they are often mistaken as harmful to society. And it is not always required that this religious belief has to be, or this type of sensitive information has to be explicitly shared, and then that will be directly used for some discriminating act. But sometimes this kind of information can be um, extracted by indirect means also. Like in our society, some attire or some physical appearance of a person may sometimes act as identifying his or her religious background. Similarly, in a modern powerful technology, there are many other means of identifying religious belief of a person uh, apart from just uh, explicit disclosure of this type of information. For example, most of the apps, mobile apps, are nowadays tracks geolocation, and just tracking this geolocation, um, the technology can be used to identify one citizen's religious belief. Like if this data analysis can be performed to identify whether a person visits a certain place in a particular day of a week, and that place may be of religious interest. From that, the religious background of that person may become evident and can be later on used indirectly to some kind of discrimination. So this geolocation sharing is very critical, and this is very common and very useful in for some applications like your app-based car rental facilities offered by Ola, Uber, or many others, Google Maps, or many other services um, are just working based on this geolocation sharing. This type of lucrative, very useful services are actually based on this geolocation sharing. Similarly, I mean, many of you I have seen are nowadays eager to develop some kind of personal safety apps for women, which is also mostly um, based on geolocation. So this geolocation sharing has a very useful contribution to modern technology. Uh, You can achieve many utilities from this geolocation sharing. But at the same time, this geolocation sharing can lead to surveillance, undesirable surveillance. And it's like some big brother is watching us everywhere. Wherever we go, whatever, it is already tracked, always tracked. And this big brother actually is a fictitious character portrayed in a novel called 1984, written by George Orwell, which acts as a metaphor to a totalitarian government. And if you read that book, you will identify that how this tracking can become disastrous, can lead to disastrous consequences to citizens of a state if it is misused by some government. And at the same time, the geolocation sharing is again used for consumer profiling, which sometimes gives us very useful services like this personalized um, ads, personalized advertisement, personalized search, and many others, which you'll see. But at the same time, this consumer profiling may lead to indirect discriminations. We'll see later in great detail. So this is very crucial. And geolocation sharing is very critical in the sense that how to use it effectively to get best out of it without compromising users' privacy. So this is very much challenging. So you must understand that you cannot just stop using geolocation sharing because then we lose many lucrative services. But at the same time, you must ensure to develop this whole uh, system of disbursing this type of services and collecting data uh, such a way that uh, respects user privacy. Because as I've said, the ethical point is that uh, we cannot just blindly um, rely on technology to solve all kinds of societal problems. I mean, technology cannot instill human values. So we need to take help the technology to a certain extent, which does not uh, lead to the breach of privacy. I mean, in our society, in the name of providing safety to our women, we cannot use the technology to extent that it actually compromises to the privacy of the. Okay. So you need to think that would you like to live in a society where brothers have to follow their sisters 24%, uh, though it is possible by technology, but whether that is at all acceptable. So we need to go beyond technology sometimes. Think the limit of use of technology also. This is the point. Now, the third point I would like to mention data repurposing in the context of privacy issues. Uh, as we have seen, I mean, if we use an app, that app always wants to get many data from. So if I want to use that app, I had to give the consent that I will sharing these informations. Now, most of the time, users have a virtual understanding, some understanding that what will be the use of that data. Mm, and that is a that sometimes is assumed based on the kind of services we are using while sharing that data. So it's some kinds of related, we understand. Uh, but many times, as I have already mentioned, that even the data collectors or merchants that are collecting the data, it may not be clear to them that what for they are collecting the data, because they are just collecting the data assuming that data has a tremendous potential to be used in later in near future. Using some sophisticated technique, those data as collected will be utilized and will find some meaning and will be used to develop some more and more lucrative solutions. It is not always true that data is being collected only to provide that service or refine that service. Uh, Data is always, I mean, sometimes collected or many a times collected just for collection and later uh, used for a different purpose, which may not be known by the data aggregators and collectors also. But the point is, and that is sometimes it's okay, because this future use of those data may yield some lucrative services which might have societal benefit, as well as that might come to the user who is sharing that data. So it's okay. But one thing we need to keep in mind that this use of that data that's collected must be legitimate. I mean, we many a times we get wondered that some app is trying to get some data which I mean do not have any relation with that kind of working of that kind of data. So it is just we can easily assume that that use of the data uh, is not very much evident. It will be repurposed. It will be used for a different purpose that we actually can think. Now, as I mentioned, the data repurposing may not be always bad. I mean, it has many useful uh, features. Like think of the medical records that are being collected over the year in a hospital and stored in database. A later point of time, some research may open up and use those data, and that research may lead to some finding which may be very helpful for future generation or has a great deal of societal benefit. It is very common. I mean, it may not be very much clear that what type of data will be used for those future research. So usually medical records are stored. Uh, the point is, uh, as long as that do not compromise with the individual privacy of the data providers or the patients who have provided their data, and as long as the research is benefiting the society, it is welcome. And this type of repurposing is acceptable. Okay. So, uh, I mean, this type of analysis where you don't know uh, before that what type of data will be used. So just assuming that this type of data may be used for some kind of analysis which might have some societal benefit, you are collecting data. So this the whole process of collecting and analyzing the data later is called retrospective data analysis. So data repurposing is very common in data retrospective data analysis, and it is accepted, as I've said, as long as it is used for benefit of the society and it is not compromising the user's privacy. But since uh, this repurposing is done beyond the knowledge of the users, those who have provided the data, there is a risk that some malicious use of those data may be done, either intentionally or unintentional loopholes in this whole process may lead to some vulnerability which may be exploited by some malicious agents or merchants to breach the privacy. So actually, in order to ensure the trust of data who are providing or sharing their personal data, assuming that that will lead to some retrospective data analysis, which will be uh, benefiting the society, maybe in future. So the you must ensure the legitimate use of that data, and the legitimacy of use of such data is depends on the context. So you must ensure that the whole process of collecting and this whole model of using data, collecting and coming up with the solution or services is dependent on the context. So user must have a trust or understanding that at least the or have an idea that what in what context his or her shared data will be used. If it is not explicitly known what purpose it will be used, at least the context of use should be known. So the merchant should not use it in any other context or uh, sell it for their benefit by repurposing that. So how technology based this whole system can be enabled to ensure legitimate use of data and mm, legitimate repurposing of data also. So that is also a bigger challenge related to privacy. Now, last but not the least, I would like to discuss data destruction and erasure with these issues related to privacy. As I have mentioned earlier, that many times users share their personal data, be it sensitive or non-sensitive, whatever, with a good faith on the merchant or the data collectors, aggregators, who is providing the service based on their goodwill. That they have an understanding, underlying understanding that their data will be in safe hand and it will never be misused based on the goodwill of that particular merchant. So they are happy to share that data. But what would happen if that particular organization or merchant gets bankrupt and as data is accepted as asset nowadays. So all the data they have collected so far will also be uh, made uh, for sale in auction. Now, some malicious organization with their bad intent may try to grab that data, maybe offering uh, extra price. What would happen in that case? How does that uh, privacy of the users will be protected in that context? So this type of thing may happen when an organization is taken over by another organization, bigger organization. So all the data along with other assets gets transferred to that bigger organization. Now, what will be the fate of the data of the users? So as user, would always they would always like to have some mechanism to uh, have some control over this transfer. Like they, the most crude sense, they would like to have uh, a understanding that whenever such thing occurs, that data, I mean, collected by a merchant gets bankrupt or taken over by some other bigger organization, their data should be erased or destroyed. So as to prevent any misuse by the teams, because they might not have the same level of faith with those organizations which are now taking hold of that data. Uh, they had that faith with that earlier organization. So how to instill this kind of mechanism in the current system of data driven technology, that is also a crucial issue. Okay, so before I conclude today's session, let me just give you the assignment.